Welcome to a world where darkness rules and legends come alive. From shadowy forests to ancient castles, vampires, monsters, and mythical creatures have haunted human imagination for centuries. In today's journey, we'll explore the origins of these chilling legends, uncover the folklore that shaped them, and reveal the myths that still captivate us today. From bloodthirsty vampires of Eastern Europe to shape-shifting beasts across cultures, the line between myth and reality blurs. Join us as we dive deep into terrifying tales, mysterious creatures, and the fascinating history that keeps these monsters alive in our stories and nightmares. Vampires across world mythologies. Vampires are among the most enduring supernatural figures in world mythology, appearing in remarkably diverse cultures long before the modern literary vampire emerged. While contemporary images often center on elegant, nocturnal blood drinkers, traditional vampire myths reflect local fears about death, disease, morality, and the boundaries between the living and the dead. Across civilizations, vampires function as explanations for unexplained deaths, social anxieties, and the terrifying possibility that death does not mark a clean end. Examining vampires across world mythologies reveals both striking similarities and culturally specific differences that illuminate how societies understand mortality and the unknown. The concept of the vampire is most strongly associated with Eastern Europe, particularly the Slavic regions of the Balkans. In Slavic folklore, vampires were typically reanimated corpses rather than romantic figures. They were believed to rise from graves at night to harm family members, drink blood, or spread illness. The causes of vampirism varied and included improper burial rites, suicide, being cursed, or dying under suspicious circumstances. Physical signs of vampirism often reflected natural decomposition processes misunderstood by pre-modern communities, such as bloated bodies, ruddy skin, or blood at the mouth. Methods of defense included staking the heart, decapitation, burning the body, or placing protective objects like garlic and holy symbols. These practices reveal how folklore functioned as a practical framework for dealing with death in a time of limited medical knowledge. Greek mythology presents another influential strand of vampire belief, centered on figures such as the Lamia, Empusa, and Mormo. Unlike Slavic vampires, these beings were often female demons rather than revenant corpses. Lamia, once a mortal woman loved by Zeus, became a child-devouring monster after Hera killed her offspring. Over time, Lamia evolved into a night-dwelling entity that preyed on children and young men, sometimes consuming blood. Greek vampire-like beings were closely tied to themes of punishment, jealousy, and uncontrolled desire. They served as moral warnings and explanations for sudden deaths, especially among the young. The emphasis on seduction and monstrosity in Greek tales influenced later European vampire literature. In Roman folklore, vampire-like creatures appeared as strigers, nocturnal birds, or women who fed on the blood of infants. The Strix embodied fears surrounding childbirth and infant mortality, which were tragically common in the ancient world. Protective rituals, amulets, and incantations were used to ward off these entities. Roman beliefs illustrate how vampire myths often emerged where communities struggled to explain high mortality rates and sought supernatural causes for deeply painful losses. The association between vampires and children in Roman myth contrasts with later European traditions but underscores a recurring link between vampirism and vulnerability. Jewish mythology includes vampire-like figures such as Lilith, a demon associated with the night, sexuality, and the death of infants. Originating in ancient Mesopotamian traditions and later incorporated into Jewish folklore, Lilith was believed to prey on newborns and seduce men, draining their vitality. Protective charms and inscriptions were commonly placed near infants to repel her. Lilith's myth reflects anxieties surrounding childbirth, female autonomy, and sexual transgression. Unlike the undead vampires of Eastern Europe, Lilith represents a demonic, immortal being, highlighting how vampiric traits could attach to spiritual entities rather than reanimated corpses. In the Middle East, ancient Mesopotamian mythology offers some of the earliest vampire-like beings, including the Akimu and the Utuku. These restless spirits of the dead were believed to roam the land if not properly buried, draining the life force of the living. The Akimu in particular resembles later vampire myths, as it was associated with hunger, thirst, and nocturnal activity. Mesopotamian vampire beliefs emphasize the importance of burial rituals and ancestral respect. Failure to honor the dead could result in supernatural retribution, reinforcing social and religious obligations within the community. South Asian mythology contains several vampire-like entities, most notably the Vetala and the Bhuta in Indian folklore. Vetalas are spirits that inhabit corpses and can possess or manipulate the living. Unlike many Western vampires, Vetalas are often depicted as intelligent and morally ambiguous rather than purely malevolent. They appear in classical Sanskrit literature, such as the Vetala Panchavimshati, where they engage humans in philosophical riddles. Bhutas, by contrast, are more ghost-like and often associated with violent or improper deaths. These figures illustrate a broader South Asian perspective in which the boundary between life and death is fluid and influenced by karma and spiritual imbalance. Chinese mythology features the Jiangshi, often translated as hopping vampire. Unlike blood-drinking European vampires, Jiangshi absorb qi, or life energy, from the living. They are animated corpses that move stiffly and are repelled by sunlight, mirrors, and Taoist talismans. The Jiangshi myth reflects Chinese cosmological beliefs about balance, energy flow, and the consequences of improper death rites. While frightening, Jiangshi also serve as cautionary figures, reminding communities of the importance of ritual correctness and harmony between the physical and spiritual worlds. Southeast Asian folklore includes some of the most visually distinctive vampire myths. In the Philippines, the aswang is a shape-shifting creature that may appear as a beautiful woman by day and a monstrous blood drinker by night. Similarly, Malaysian and Indonesian folklore describes the Penanggalan, a female vampire whose head detaches from her body, trailing organs as it hunts for blood, particularly from pregnant women. These myths strongly reflect fears related to childbirth, sexuality, and female power. They also demonstrate how vampire lore adapts to local environments and social structures while retaining core themes of predation and secrecy. African mythologies also contain vampire-like beings, though they are often less widely known. Among the Ashanti people of Ghana, the Sasabonsum is a vampiric forest creature that attacks travelers and drains their blood. In East Africa, the Adze folklore can appear as a firefly or human and feeds on blood, especially of children. These entities are often linked to witchcraft and moral transgression. African vampire myths frequently emphasize communal danger and the breakdown of social trust, reflecting the importance of cohesion and mutual responsibility in many African societies. In the Americas, indigenous cultures developed their own vampire-like legends. The Aztec Cihuateteo were spirits of women who died in childbirth and were believed to roam at night, harming children and causing illness. In parts of South America, legends of the Pixteco describe a figure who steals body fat or blood from victims, often symbolizing fears of colonial exploitation. These myths show how vampirism can evolve to express historical trauma and social oppression, transforming supernatural predators into symbols of real-world violence. Despite their cultural differences, vampire myths share several core characteristics. Most involve beings that exist between life and death, operate primarily at night, and feed on vital substances such as blood or life energy. Vampires are frequently associated with improper deaths, social transgression, or unfulfilled obligations. They also provoke ritual responses, including protective charms, taboos, and communal actions, reinforcing social norms and collective identity. In this way, vampires serve both as monsters and as tools for maintaining order. The persistence of vampire myths across cultures suggests that they arise from universal human concerns. Fear of death, anxiety about disease, and uncertainty about what happens after life ends are experiences shared by all societies. Before scientific explanations, vampiric beings provided a framework for understanding these fears. Even today, modern vampire fiction continues to adapt ancient themes, reflecting contemporary issues such as alienation, desire, and immortality. Modern interpretations of vampires have drawn heavily from these ancient mythologies, selectively reshaping older beliefs to suit new cultural contexts. 19th-century European literature, particularly works such as John Polidori's The Vampire and Bram Stoker's Dracula, synthesized Slavic folklore with aristocratic imagery, Christian symbolism, and Victorian anxieties about sexuality and degeneration. These literary vampires retained core mythological traits such as blood consumption and nocturnal activity while gaining psychological depth and emotional complexity. The transformation of the vampire from a grotesque corpse into a tragic or seductive figure illustrates how myth adapts to changing social values. Film, television, and popular media have continued this process of reinterpretation, often blending global vampire traditions into hybrid forms. Asian cinema has reimagined the Jiangshi in both horror and comedy, while Western media frequently borrows visual and thematic elements from Southeast Asian or African folklore. This cross-cultural exchange demonstrates that vampire myths are not static relics but living narratives that evolve through storytelling. Each adaptation reflects the fears and desires of its audience, whether those involve pandemics, loss of identity, or the longing for eternal youth. At an anthropological level, vampires can also be understood as liminal figures. They occupy thresholds between categories: life and death, human and monster, self and other. Liminal beings are especially powerful in myth because they destabilize boundaries that societies rely upon for meaning and order. By violating norms surrounding death, consumption, and sexuality, vampires force communities to confront what they consider sacred or forbidden. This symbolic role explains why vampires often provoke strong emotional reactions, combining fascination with revulsion. Psychological interpretations further suggest that vampire myths externalize internal human conflicts. Blood, as a symbol, represents life, kinship, and continuity. The act of blood drinking can therefore be read as a distorted expression of dependency, desire, or survival anxiety. Vampires embody fears of exploitation and loss of autonomy, particularly in contexts where communities experience oppression, disease, or social upheaval. Seen this way, the vampire is less an external monster and more a mirror reflecting human vulnerability. Religious perspectives also shape vampire mythology. In Christian-influenced cultures, vampires are often repelled by holy objects, reinforcing the triumph of sacred order over profane corruption. In contrast, cultures rooted in karmic or animistic worldviews portray vampiric beings as consequences of imbalance rather than embodiments of absolute evil. These differences highlight how underlying belief systems influence the moral framing of supernatural creatures. Vampires may be damned sinners, restless ancestors, or morally ambiguous spirits, depending on cultural context. Ultimately, the global prevalence of vampire myths underscores their narrative power. They endure because they are flexible, symbolic, and deeply rooted in shared human experience. Whether feared as agents of death or reimagined as tragic immortals, vampires continue to evolve while preserving ancient foundations. Their stories remind us that mythology is not merely about the past, but about how humans continually reinterpret fear, death, and desire in order to understand themselves and the world they inhabit. These myths remain powerful, adaptable, and culturally meaningful. Creatures like Lamia, Empusa, and Mormo. In ancient Greek mythology, monsters were not merely beasts to be slain by heroes, but symbolic figures that embodied fear, desire, punishment, and the fragile boundaries between the human and the divine. Among these figures, Lamia, Empusa, and Mormo stand out as closely related female monsters associated with seduction, child killing, vampirism, and the terror of the night. Though sometimes treated as separate beings and sometimes as overlapping names for the same horror, these creatures reveal much about Greek attitudes toward femininity, motherhood, sexuality, and social order. By examining their origins, characteristics, and cultural roles, we can better understand how these monstrous women functioned within ancient Greek thought and later traditions. Lamia is perhaps the most well-known of the three creatures and serves as the foundation from which the others developed. In early myth, Lamia was originally a beautiful Libyan queen loved by Zeus. As with many mortal women who attracted the attention of the king of the gods, Lamia became the victim of Hero's jealousy. In revenge, Hero either killed Lamia's children or drove her mad so that she murdered them herself. Overcome by grief and rage, Lamia transformed into a monster who preyed upon the children of others. This transformation marks an important shift. Lamia is not born monstrous but becomes so through divine punishment and psychological trauma. Her story reflects the Greek tendency to explain monstrosity as a corruption of the natural order rather than a purely alien force. Physically, Lamia was often described as having the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a serpent, though descriptions varied across time and region. This hybrid form symbolized her divided nature, combining human intelligence and emotion with animal savagery and cold-blooded cruelty. Some sources claim that Hera cursed Lamia with insomnia, forcing her to relive her loss endlessly, while Zeus granted her the ability to remove her eyes so that she could rest. This unsettling detail further emphasizes her liminal state, suspended between divine favor and divine punishment. Lamia's monstrous body and behavior thus reflect both her suffering and her danger. In Greek folklore, Lamia evolved into a bogey figure used to frighten children into obedience. Parents warned that Lamia would devour misbehaving youths, much like later European tales of witches or ogres. Over time, she also acquired vampiric traits, drinking the blood of her victims and feeding on their vitality. In some later interpretations, Lamia became a seductive demon who lured young men before consuming them, blending maternal horror with erotic danger. This dual role highlights Greek anxieties surrounding female sexuality, especially when it existed outside the boundaries of marriage and motherhood. Empusa, while sometimes treated as a distinct monster, is closely connected to Lamia and shares many of her traits. Empusa appears most prominently in Greek comedy and later folklore, particularly in the works of Aristophanes. She is described as a shape-shifting female demon who serves the goddess Hecate, the deity of crossroads, ghosts, and magic. Like Lamia, Empusa preys upon travelers and young men, using deception and seduction to approach her victims. Her association with Hecate places her firmly within the realm of night, sorcery, and the supernatural. One of Empusa's most distinctive features is her mismatched legs. In some accounts, one leg is made of bronze and the other of a donkey or cow. This grotesque asymmetry serves as a visual marker of her inhuman nature, revealing the monster beneath her alluring disguise. Empusa was said to transform into a beautiful woman to entice men, only to drain their blood or devour their flesh once they were vulnerable. This portrayal reinforces the theme of deceptive female beauty as a source of mortal danger, a recurring motif in Greek myth. Unlike Lamia, whose tragedy gives her a degree of sympathy, Empusa is more overtly comic and grotesque in literary sources. In Aristophanes' play The Frogs, Empusa appears as a frightening but absurd apparition encountered by Dionysus and his companion. Her constant transformations create both fear and humor. This treatment shows how monsters could be used flexibly in Greek storytelling, serving as objects of terror, ridicule, or moral instruction depending on context. Mormo is the most obscure of the three figures, yet she plays an important role in the development of their shared mythology. The name Mormo was often used as an epithet for Lamia or as a separate child-frightening demon. Like Lamia, Mormo was associated with devouring children and haunting the night. Some ancient sources describe her as a nurse or companion of Hecate, further linking her to Empusa and the chthonic world. Over time, Mormo became a generic term for a terrifying female spirit rather than a clearly defined individual. The use of Mormo as a scare figure is particularly significant. Greek mothers and nurses reportedly invoked her name to discipline children, warning them that Mormo would come if they misbehaved. In this sense, Mormo functioned less as a mythological character and more as a cultural tool for enforcing social norms. Her lack of a fixed narrative allowed her to adapt to local traditions and fears, making her a versatile symbol of childhood terror. Together, Lamia, Empusa, and Mormo represent fears centered on the female body and its perceived dangers. They are nocturnal, predatory, and associated with the breakdown of social roles. Yet they are also deeply human in origin, shaped by grief, anxiety, and the need to explain suffering. These monsters reveal how ancient Greeks used myth to explore the darkest aspects of life, transforming fear into story and chaos into meaning. Influenced later European vampire myths. The figure of the vampire, as it appears in European folklore and literature, did not emerge in a vacuum. Rather, it is the culmination of centuries of beliefs, myths, and cultural anxieties surrounding death, disease, and the supernatural. By the time vampires became prominent in European imagination, particularly in Eastern Europe, they were already shaped by a long history of cross-cultural influences. From ancient Mesopotamian and Greek tales to Slavic folklore and early Christian teachings, these myths combined to form the archetype of the vampire that would later dominate literature and popular culture. Ancient Mesopotamian and Near Eastern precursors. The earliest known influences on European vampire myths can be traced back to the ancient Near East. Mesopotamian civilizations, such as the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, had a rich pantheon of spirits associated with death and disease. Among these were the Akimu and Lilu, spirits of the dead who could return to haunt the living. The Akimu were restless spirits, often those who did not receive proper funerary rites, wandering the earth to exact vengeance or drain vitality from the living. Similarly, the Lilu were malevolent female demons believed to prey on men, particularly while they slept. These figures share key characteristics with later European vampire myths. They are revenants, spirits of the dead who return to disturb the living, and they are associated with the consumption of life force, whether through blood, dreams, or energy. While these Mesopotamian spirits were not vampires in the modern sense, they established a framework for the fear of the dead returning, a theme central to European vampire lore. Ancient Greek and Roman influences. Classical antiquity also contributed to vampire-like myths in Europe. Greek mythology contains stories of blood-drinking spirits and creatures that prey upon the living. The Empusa, a demonic being, was said to seduce men and drink their blood, while the Lamia, originally a queen cursed by Hera, became a child-devouring demoness who fed on human blood. These figures embody several traits that would later be absorbed into European vampire legends: nocturnal activity, seduction, and the consumption of blood as a means of sustaining life. The Romans, meanwhile, absorbed and adapted these myths, introducing the idea of restless dead in their own folklore. Tales of the Striges, flying creatures that sucked the blood of infants, demonstrated a lingering fascination with vampiric behavior, particularly as it pertained to the protection of the living from supernatural threats. The Striges, like later vampires, were associated with night, fear, and predation upon vulnerable victims. Roman literature and ritual practices surrounding the dead also emphasized the importance of funerary rites to prevent the deceased from returning as harmful spirits, a theme central to Slavic and Eastern European vampire beliefs. Slavic and Eastern European folklore. The most direct ancestors of the modern European vampire come from Slavic folklore, particularly in regions that now encompass Poland, Ukraine, Serbia, and Romania. In these cultures, vampires were known by various names, including Upa, Vrykolakas, and Strigo, and were typically described as corpses that returned from the grave to harm the living. Unlike the seductive vampires of modern fiction, these beings were often grotesque and decayed, emphasizing fear of contagion, corruption, and social disorder. Several recurring themes emerge from Slavic vampire beliefs. First, improper burial practices could result in vampirism. Corpses that were buried without proper rites, or those of individuals who died violently, unnaturally, or without reconciliation with the community, were particularly prone to becoming vampires. The idea that social or religious failure could lead to supernatural punishment reflects a broader societal concern with moral and ritual propriety. Second, these vampires were thought to spread disease. Outbreaks of unexplained illness were often attributed to vampiric activity, particularly when multiple deaths occurred in the same village. This association between vampires and contagion likely amplified fear of the unknown and contributed to the development of preventative practices, such as staking, decapitation, and ritual burning. Third, Slavic vampires were deeply intertwined with agrarian society. They were believed to return to feast on family members or livestock, thereby threatening both lineage and sustenance. This illustrates how vampire myths were not purely supernatural in focus, they were also pragmatic responses to social anxiety, disease, and mortality. In essence, the vampire served as a narrative mechanism for explaining and controlling the uncontrollable aspects of life and death. Vampire beliefs in the Balkans and Romania. Romania and the Balkans contributed particularly vivid elements to the European vampire archetype. The Strigo of Romanian folklore are often cited as the direct precursors to the modern vampire. Strigo could be living or dead, with the dead varieties returning from the grave to feed on their descendants or neighbors. They were thought to have the ability to shapeshift into animals, become invisible, and control the weather, abilities that later became standard features of fictional vampires. The historical context of the Balkans, with frequent wars, plagues, and social instability, created fertile ground for the perpetuation of vampire myths. In times of crisis, unexplained deaths were often attributed to vampirism, leading to vampire hunts and ritualistic exhumations of suspected corpses. Notably, 18th century Europe witnessed several documented vampire scares in the region, including the infamous case of Arnold Pauli in Serbia, which drew the attention of local authorities and even the Habsburg monarchy. These events were widely publicized and contributed to the vampire's eventual migration into Western European consciousness. The role of Christianization and religious influence. Christianity played a significant role in shaping European vampire myths. The Church sought to reinterpret pagan beliefs about the dead within a Christian moral framework. Vampires were often depicted as souls damned for their sins, emphasizing the moral consequences of earthly behavior. In some traditions, vampires were thought to be witches or heretics who returned from the grave to terrorize the living, reinforcing ecclesiastical authority and the concept of spiritual retribution. Additionally, Christian symbols and rituals became important tools for combating vampires. Garlic, holy water, crucifixes, and prayers were incorporated into folklore as protective measures. The Church's insistence on proper burial rites and the sanctification of cemeteries also reinforced societal controls over death and mourning, reducing the perceived risk of the dead returning. This fusion of religious and folkloric practices shaped the distinctively European vampire, morally, socially, and spiritually threatening. The influence of plague and disease. Disease, particularly plague, had a profound impact on the development of vampire myths. Epidemics were often sudden, inexplicable, and devastating, leading communities to seek supernatural explanations. Vampires provided a convenient narrative for the spread of disease. Corpses that returned to feed on the living could symbolically and literally infect communities, mirroring the transmission of illness. Accounts from 16th and 17th century Eastern Europe describe villages staking corpses suspected of causing outbreaks of disease. These practices reveal how vampire myths functioned as a form of proto-scientific reasoning, offering an explanation for mortality and a method of social intervention. Fear of contamination, coupled with a lack of medical understanding, intensified belief in revenants, embedding the vampire deeply into cultural consciousness. Transmission to Western Europe. The movement of vampire myths from Eastern to Western Europe occurred gradually through travel, trade, and literature. By the 18th century, Western European writers, physicians, and travelers began documenting the vampire phenomena of the Balkans, often framing them as exotic curiosities. Reports of exhumations, blood-drinking corpses, and preventive rituals fascinated Western audiences and fueled literary imagination. A notable example is the 1732 account of the supposed vampire epidemic in Moravia, which described villagers disinterring corpses and discovering fresh blood. Such reports were widely circulated in newspapers and pamphlets, influencing writers and thinkers across the continent. These accounts transformed the vampire from a regional superstition into a subject of broader European interest, eventually inspiring Gothic fiction and romanticized interpretations of the creature. Literary transformations and Gothic influence. The literary vampire emerged in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, building upon folklore while adding new elements of seduction, aristocracy, and exoticism. Works such as John Polidori's The Vampire, 1819, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1897, synthesized Slavic folklore, classical myths, and contemporary anxieties into a compelling narrative form. Polidori's story introduced the vampire as a suave aristocrat preying upon the innocent, a transformation from the grotesque, decayed revenants of Eastern Europe. Stoker expanded this vision, incorporating Romanian folklore, fears of contagion, and Victorian anxieties about sexuality, disease, and foreign influence. The result was a figure that was at once terrifying and alluring, bridging the folkloric and the modern literary imagination. This evolution demonstrates how vampire myths adapted to changing cultural contexts. While rooted in fear of the dead, disease, and social disorder, the literary vampire absorbed themes of eroticism, power, and identity, reflecting broader societal concerns. European writers effectively reinterpreted centuries-old folklore for new audiences, transforming local superstition into a global cultural phenomenon. European vampire myths are the product of a complex interplay of ancient beliefs, regional folklore, religious influence, and societal anxieties. From Mesopotamian spirits to Greek demons, from Slavic revenants to Romanian strigo, these legends converged to create a coherent archetype, a being that straddled life and death, morality and sin, fear and fascination. The evolution of the vampire myth reflects both continuity and adaptation. Core fears of death, disease, and social disruption persisted across centuries, while cultural, religious, and literary contexts shaped the specific characteristics of the vampire. By the 19th century, these influences coalesced into the European vampire that would dominate Gothic literature and eventually global popular culture. In examining the historical and cultural roots of European vampire myths, it becomes clear that the vampire is more than a fictional monster. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest fears and desires. The myths remind us of the enduring human fascination with mortality, the unknown, and the thin boundary between life and death, offering insight into the ways societies negotiate anxiety, morality, and the supernatural. European vampires, therefore, are not merely the product of imagination but a rich tapestry of centuries of storytelling, ritual, and cultural exchange, a testament to the power of myth in shaping human understanding of the world. Jiangshi Hopping Vampire. The Jiangshi, often referred to as the hopping vampire or Chinese zombie, is one of the most unique and intriguing figures in East Asian folklore. Unlike Western vampires, which are often depicted as suave, seductive, and nocturnal bloodsuckers, Jiangshi are reanimated corpses that move in a stiff, hopping manner. Their origins, behaviors, and cultural significance are deeply intertwined with Chinese beliefs about death, spirits, and the afterlife. Understanding the Jiangshi provides insight into traditional Chinese cosmology, folklore, and even modern pop culture adaptations. Origins and historical context. The concept of the Jiangshi dates back to the Qing dynasty, 1644 to 1912, although references to similar undead entities can be traced earlier in Chinese literature. The term Jiangshi literally means stiff corpse, derived from the characters rigid and corpse. This name reflects the most distinctive characteristic of the Jiangshi, its rigid, immobile posture. According to historical records and folklore, Jiangshi arise when a deceased person's soul fails to depart the body properly or when improper burial rituals are performed. In traditional Chinese beliefs, a soul can linger in the mortal world due to unresolved matters, improper funeral rites, or sudden violent death. The combination of these circumstances could lead to the creation of a Jiangshi. Several historical accounts suggest that during times of epidemic, famine, or war, the appearance of hopping corpses was reported. Some scholars argue that these tales may have been inspired by misunderstood cases of rigor mortis or natural decomposition of bodies, particularly in remote rural regions where superstition and folklore were prominent. Stories circulated that villagers would encounter stiff corpses in the night, leading to panic and the development of ritualistic methods to control these revenants. Physical appearance and behavior. Jiangshi are often depicted wearing traditional Qing dynasty garments, which suggests a strong cultural and historical link to that period. Their skin may appear pale, greenish, or even moldy due to decomposition. One of the most iconic features of the Jiangshi is its movement. Instead of walking, it hops with arms outstretched, which is said to result from rigor mortis, the stiffening of muscles after death. The hopping motion is not merely a narrative quirk but also symbolizes the unnaturalness of the Jiangshi. It straddles the line between life and death, emphasizing its status as a creature neither fully alive nor fully dead. Furthermore, Jiangshi are nocturnal and are believed to absorb the qi, vital essence, of the living to sustain themselves. This is a key distinction from Western vampires, which drink blood. Jiangshi feed on the life force rather than physical fluids, reflecting Taoist and Confucian beliefs about energy and vitality. Jiangshi are also highly sensitive to spiritual and magical symbols. Traditional folklore suggests that a Taoist priest can control or repel Jiangshi using talismans inscribed with spells, chanting, or rituals involving mirrors, bells, or even sticky rice. The yellow talisman paper, often seen on the forehead of the Jiangshi, is believed to immobilize it, preventing it from harming the living. This interplay between supernatural fear and ritual control reveals much about Chinese attitudes toward death, spirits, and the need to maintain harmony between the living and the dead. Causes of reanimation. The folklore surrounding Jiangshi explains multiple causes for their emergence. Improper burial or funeral rites. In traditional Chinese culture, death rituals were paramount. Failure to observe proper rites could trap the soul in the mortal realm. For example, if a family neglected to burn incense, provide offerings, or bury the body correctly, the deceased could become a Jiangshi. Sudden or violent death. Those who die tragically, by murder, accident, or suicide, are believed to have restless spirits. Their unresolved anger or trauma could animate the body. Spiritual or magical intervention. Some legends suggest that sorcerers or Taoist priests could intentionally reanimate corpses for protection, revenge, or as tools for occult purposes. These Jiangshi are often depicted as more dangerous and difficult to control. Disease or misunderstanding of natural phenomena. Some anthropologists and historians argue that reports of Jiangshi could be linked to misunderstanding natural decomposition. Rigor mortis, bloating, and the shifting of bodies in water or graves could create the illusion of movement. Villagers, lacking modern medical knowledge, interpreted these phenomena as supernatural occurrences. Cultural significance. The Jiangshi serves multiple symbolic functions in Chinese culture. At a basic level, it represents the fear of death and the consequences of failing to honor the dead properly. Confucian philosophy emphasizes filial piety, respect for ancestors, and ritual observance. The Jiangshi embodies the transgression of these values. A stiff, hopping corpse is a terrifying reminder of what can happen when the social and spiritual order is disrupted. Moreover, the Jiangshi reflects Taoist ideas about the balance of qi. In Chinese thought, life force must flow harmoniously. The Jiangshi, by absorbing qi from the living, represents an inversion of this natural order, a force of chaos that threatens community well-being. Rituals to ward off Jiangshi are, therefore, not just about personal safety but about restoring cosmic balance. Interestingly, the Jiangshi also has a moral dimension. Some stories depict it punishing the greedy, the disrespectful, or the wicked after death. In this sense, it functions as both a cautionary tale and a supernatural enforcer of societal norms. Jiangshi in popular culture. In the 20th century, the Jiangshi gained international fame through cinema, literature, and games. The 1980s Hong Kong film Mr. Vampire popularized the hopping vampire as a comedic horror figure, blending slapstick humor with supernatural thrills. The film introduced iconic elements such as the Taoist priest, talismans, and the distinctive hopping movement, cementing the Jiangshi's image in modern media. Since then, the Jiangshi has appeared in numerous films, television shows, comics, and video games. Its portrayal has evolved. Some adaptations emphasize horror, while others highlight comedy or fantasy. Despite these changes, the core elements, rigid posture, hopping locomotion, and spiritual predation, remain central, showcasing the resilience of this folkloric archetype. In video games, the Jiangshi often appears as an enemy or boss character, capitalizing on its unique movement style to challenge players. In literature, it serves as a symbol of unresolved trauma, ancestral tension, or mystical power. Even in Western media, elements of the Jiangshi have inspired reinterpretations, often blending Eastern and Western horror motifs. Symbolism and psychological interpretation. The Jiangshi is more than a folklore monster, it is a cultural metaphor. Psychologists and anthropologists have suggested that the fear of Jiangshi reflects broader anxieties about death, decay, and familial responsibility. Its rigid, hopping movement can evoke the image of the inevitable approach of death, unavoidable and mechanical. Its absorption of life force can symbolize the fear of being drained by obligations or by the unrelenting march of mortality. The reliance on talismans, rituals, and spiritual expertise to control the Jiangshi also mirrors human attempts to assert control over death and uncertainty. In this sense, the Jiangshi embodies both the terror of death and the hope that order, ritual, and knowledge can mitigate supernatural chaos. Regional variations. While the Jiangshi is most commonly associated with northern China, variations exist across East Asia. In some regions, similar creatures appear in folklore with slight differences in behavior, appearance, or methods of control. For example, Taiwanese folklore often emphasizes the Jiangshi's nocturnal nature and vulnerability to sunlight. In Hong Kong cinema, the Jiangshi frequently wears Qing dynasty garb, reinforcing historical and cultural associations. These regional variations reflect localized beliefs, social norms, and historical experiences, demonstrating the adaptability of the Jiangshi myth. Modern relevance. Today, the Jiangshi remains a vibrant element of cultural heritage. It is celebrated during festivals, reenacted in performances, and referenced in modern media. Beyond entertainment, the Jiangshi provides insight into Chinese history, social structure, and spiritual belief systems. It reminds us that folklore is not merely fanciful storytelling but a reflection of communal fears, ethical codes, and metaphysical understanding. In a global context, the Jiangshi also highlights the universality of undead myths. Like vampires in Western culture or zombies in modern horror, Jiangshi embody the human confrontation with death, the unknown, and the consequences of moral and social transgression. Yet, the Jiangshi is uniquely Chinese, rooted in Taoist, Confucian, and folk traditions, showing how cultural context shapes even universal fears. The Jiangshi, the hopping vampire of Chinese folklore, is a fascinating figure that blends horror, morality, and cultural tradition. Its origins are tied to improper death rituals, restless spirits, and supernatural intervention. Its stiff, hopping movement, Qing dynasty attire, and consumption of qi make it distinct from Western undead figures. Culturally, it embodies fears about death, filial piety, and spiritual imbalance, while also offering opportunities for comedic, dramatic, and fantastical storytelling in modern media. More than a monster, the Jiangshi serves as a bridge between the living and the dead, a symbol of moral accountability, and a testament to the richness of Chinese folklore. Its continued presence in literature, cinema, and games attests to its enduring appeal, showing how traditional myths can evolve yet remain deeply resonant. The Jiangshi reminds us that death, ritual, and the supernatural are not merely abstract concepts but integral to cultural identity, social ethics, and collective imagination. In the end, the hopping vampire is more than a creature of fear, it is a cultural touchstone, a symbol of humanity's ongoing attempt to reconcile life with the mysteries of death, order with chaos, and tradition with modernity. Its stiff hops echo across centuries, a persistent reminder of the intricate interplay between folklore, belief, and human psychology. And that concludes our journey through the shadowy world of vampires, monsters, and ancient folklore. From terrifying legends to mysterious myths, these stories have shaped cultures and haunted imaginations for centuries. Whether they lurk in the night, stalk the forests, or dwell in forgotten tales, these creatures remind us of the thin line between fear and fascination. If you enjoyed uncovering the secrets of these legendary beings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another dive into the unknown. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes, the myths are closer than we think.